Dream machine. .com, HL7, I-18 in the snap. We're building the future, never looking back.
Welcome back to Imaging Informatics Unplugged. I'm Jason, and today we're unpacking something that every imaging leader eventually wrestles with. That moment when your PACS starts to feel tired, the department starts grumbling, and you're left wondering, do we stick with what we know or do we jump to something new? But what does good actually look like when it comes to PACS selection? How do you make decisions that aren't based on emotion, hype, or who has the nicest RSNA booth? Our guest today led one of the most structured, transparent, and frankly courageous PACS selection process I've seen. Our guest, Dr. Alex Towbin, is Professor of Radiology and the Neil D. Johnson Chair of Radiology Informatics at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. He's also Associate Chief of Radiology, Associate CMIO, and Associate Chief of Staff. He's world-renowned for advancing pediatric radiology, imaging informatics, and quality improvement. Over 300 peer-reviewed papers, global lectures, leadership roles across SIM, RSNA, ACR, and the list goes on. And today, he's here to talk about what happens behind the curtain of a PACS decision, the bias, the votes, the data, the vendors that struggle when asked to load real anonymized pediatric data sets, and the surprising choice to stick with the incumbent. In this conversation, we'll also get into how to balance incremental upgrades versus missing the next big wave, why radiologists shouldn't be the only voice in the room, and yes, how many calories does it take to anonymize a terabyte of tricky pediatric imaging data? So stick around, whether you're about to replace a PACS or VNA or just want to avoid your next RFP turning into a slow motion disaster, this one's for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And with all that said, let's jump into it. Okay, well, welcome to Imaging Informatics Unplugged, and welcome, Alex. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here and talk about this paper and the process we went through.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this paper because as we were talking offline, there's a lot of things where, whether it's AI models or kind of cutting edge things, and we sometimes forget the day-to-day real life aspects of what's going to affect us in an operational setting. Maybe to set the table, could you give us a elevator pitch on what you were capturing in this paper?
Yeah, so this was now a couple of years ago, but we went through a PACS selection process, and we were tasked at the outset with serving the PACS market. There were grumblings in our department about the quality of our PACS and if it was still the right decision for us. And so that was the goal of the project, was to see what's going on in the PACS marketplace and should we select a new vendor. And this manuscript then talks about our process of PACS selection all the way from that first charge through the decision that we made as a group.
In the paper, it was a really well composed data-driven process for selecting or reaffirming a previous incumbent or a previous existing connection. When you went into this, did you have an inclination either way if you were going to be going to a net new product or if this was going to be kind of reaffirming what you already had in place?
I didn't know. I had my own opinions about the marketplace and my own opinions about our current vendor, but didn't have an idea of where we would go as a department. My own opinion at the outset was that it's a lot of work to replace a PACS, and if we don't have a really good reason to do it, we shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And so that was maybe a bias going in, but we tried to say these are the biases ahead of time, and how do we prevent those biases from interfering with a good decision?
You mentioned that there were maybe grumblings of people feeling a certain way. Sometimes there's an emotional setting of why you feel a certain way. Those aren't quantifiable aspects of, is this a good PACS or is this not a good PACS? Maybe it's more relationship oriented. Did that factor into this at all?
I think so a little bit. My belief is that most radiologists get imprinted with their first PACS, the one that they learn and then they use. And for many people, that's in residency. And because you start to learn it, that's how you learn how to be a radiologist on it. And you learn the functionality, and that's interwoven into your learning all about radiology. And so then you move to a new place in fellowship and you say, well, this doesn't do what this other one did, or the buttons are in different spots, or the keyboard shortcuts are different, or the mouse doesn't work the same way. And so those grumblings happen. And as a department grows and hires more people from varied backgrounds, you hear that more and more. And so I think some of it was that, but maybe not all of it. There are definite deficiencies of every PACS. And so some of it's related to actual deficiencies.
I'm curious, just out of your own personal experience, how many different systems have you interacted with on your journey in your career?
I've really used 2 PACS.
Okay.
So one in residency and then, 3 PACS. One in residency, I came to Cincinnati Children's as a fellow, and we had a different PACS at that time. And then while I was a fellow, we started PACS selection at that point. So this was about 20 years ago. We started a PACS selection process at that point. And then as I was faculty, that was when I replaced that PACS. That was one of my first jobs as leading informatics in the department here. And so this was then going to be this 3rd generation PACS for this department, and it would have been the 3rd one for me as well. So it's those 3. Well, one from residency, one from fellowship, and then the rest is faculty here.
The scope of this paper was focused on, and the scope of the project that you've outlined is you're replacing your radiology PACS. There's a number of principles that you outlined: transparency, openness, honesty, inquisitiveness, collaboration, dedication. How do you feel that, from a principled perspective, one could review this paper and maybe apply that to other procurements, maybe if they're replacing a VNA or an image exchange platform?
Yeah, so I think everything in this paper is reproducible. It doesn't mean everyone will reproduce it the same way. And I don't think every procurement requires this level of detail. I think this is the most detailed you would go. And it makes sense to me. A PACS is a decision that's going to impact every phase of the department over a decade and really be crucial investment in day-to-day operations. Other things are not like that and don't need that level of detail or that level of governance. And so right-sizing the procurement process for the product is important. From our different principles, we decided that as a group on what we wanted our principles to be. And I think that part's important as well, that the selection committee, whoever that is, identifies what the principles are to govern procurement and then trying to decide how you meet those principles together and what that means for the group. And so, for example, transparency meant things like we would share all the data as we received it, share the raw data, let people make their own conclusions from the data. But that all was with the group. But it also means for the people not on the group, sending out the same details, but packaging in a way that, since they're not in all the meetings, they could understand. So whether it's recorded messages so they could review it in more time, with the detail information attached to it, to include it in faculty meetings, inviting people, even though they're not part of the process, to sit in on the process. All of those levels of transparency as well. Openness is very similar, but it being open about the opinions that go along with it and not holding back, making sure you're open about your biases and going in, and openness to new ideas. And so we tried to model those things. An example of like openness is having radiologists sit in the shoes of technologists and examine the product from a technologist angle or an IT professional, and vice versa. And so everyone evaluating on every component of it was eye-opening for people on the selection committee. And it really, I think those things helped us to get to our ultimate decision.
You're kind of touching on, you have a lot of different stakeholders. You have the primary clinical users. You have, your back-end informatics PACS people. There's IT folks that might not directly deal with the PACS, but they're going to have to help implement it to some degree. As you start bringing kind of more chefs into the kitchen, sometimes, everyone has a different way that they want to season with salt or whatnot. Did you find it challenging to make sure that like all of these principles were upheld in a standard way across all of the different stakeholders and different groups as the process began?
I think that got back to our openness around the discussion. So for the most part, no. The answer to that, no. But we had discussion on things like, should everyone's vote count equally? And should everyone's voices count equally? Does the radiologist voice matter more than a technologist voice or an IT professional voice? We decided no. We're all users of the PACS in different ways. I guess in some ways by the number of people on the committee, there was different numbers of votes by the people, but every vote counted the same. All pieces of feedback were taken into account equally.
I could imagine that was an interesting conversation to kind of untangle, because I see the pros to it, but I also see there'd probably be a lot of opportunity where that would create a lot of like interesting conversations where people might not agree with that approach.
It was clear to us that that was the case as well. From the vendor's point of view, what we found is many of the vendors, if not the vast majority of them, really focus on the radiologist as the decision maker, and so driving presentations around the radiologist as the user base. The feature sets are designed for the radiologist. And we were taking a different approach, saying we care about the holistic system. The technologist is the most common user of the PACS. They use it in a different way than the radiologist. And so, but we need workflows that work for the technologist, and we want to see how those workflows are implemented. The IT professional interacts with the PACS very differently, but their job is just as important for the stability of the PACS, our ability to innovate around solutions related to the PACS. And so we wanted to make sure that those voices and those capabilities were showcased and discussed openly.
When we were starting out, I talked a bit about emotion is sometimes a driver of decision making. However, the process that you outline in the paper wasn't very much quantitative. You had pillar weights, concept scores, RFP metrics, but I'm also curious kind of how you balance that out with the gut feel and trust. And I've been part of RFPs, and sometimes the responses are so amazing, but you have a bit of a twinge in your gut about, I wonder if they can actually do what they're saying that they can do.
Yeah.
How did you handle that? What was your approach?
It's hard to know if they can handle what they say they can handle for all vendors. So you never know. And I don't mean that in a way trying to be disparaging to vendors. Just the data that comes in from different sites is different. The workflows are different. And so it's a truth from their experiences, but that doesn't mean our experience isn't different. And so that is hard to do. The balance of emotion. So we let data inform decisions. It doesn't drive decisions. It wasn't a purely data-driven decision-making process. The data was presented to the group. We said, does this feel right? And often, like, the data leads to a ranking of some sort. And does the ranking feel right based on this data? If not, why? How would you correct around it? And those qualitative comments were important as we were going through, and those were the ultimate deciders. The data definitely informed that decision, though, and informed the discussion.
When we think about informing the decision, where that decision ended up landing was the incumbent vendor was selected, and which I guess, kind of shows a lot of, any of those gut feelings or the emotion that might have been driven in the initial stages. There obviously was enough of a great relationship to kind of carry forward and decide this was the best path. I think you were going to have a planned 3-year reevaluation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, and I've seen this as being part of different procurements where, whether it's an incumbent or kind of a PACS system of the old guard, we can kind of think of probably 5 vendors off the top of our head, what I'm alluding to.
Yeah.
But then there's kind of the cutting edge vendors that may be doing a lot more modern approaches to workflows, image exchange, AI integration. How do you balance moving forward and also using a reliable system? I think in your case, you've stuck with the incumbent, but I'll give you some space to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to talk about the market we evaluated. We looked at about 10 different vendors. There may be 12 or 13 on the market overall, but we looked at 10 vendors. We informed the decision based on what we knew of the marketplace as well as outside reports, and drove that decision making and evaluated different things. Like you said, there were about 5 that really felt like they had no chance for us. They didn't fit our workflow. It felt clunky to the things that we wanted to do. And 5 that seemed viable for us. Once we moved to the viable ones, it was pretty clear that 3 or 4 were very good and met the needs largely. And we're picking up basically differences in flavors. I think there are a couple of vendors that are better than the vendor we stuck with, but it really felt like incremental gain to me. And there's a real cost to switching a PACS. Beyond the financial, it sets you back for 2 years from doing other things that are cutting edge. And I didn't think it was ultimately, in my opinion, I didn't think it was worth that opportunity cost to get incremental gain on the applications. And the incremental gain was for the radiologist side of it. It didn't feel like there was any incremental gain. If anything, it may have been a decrease for the other user roles we talked about.
That's really interesting.
And we had the things that we valued on the vendor that we use. We have a very stable system, a very redundant system. So we have almost zero unplanned downtime. And if we do, 100% of our images are immediately available. We have great monitoring. We have good ability to design workflows that we think are efficient or largely efficient. And those were things that we thought we might be giving up or at least placing at risk. And so that's why I say that incremental gain. I think the other part, I believe our current PACS generation, we're in PACS 2.0. Many of those old guard systems are that first generation or maybe up to a 1.5 version. And the new ones are 2.0 to 2.5. But I do think we're on the verge of 3.0, where we have more AI integrated workflows or agentic integrated workflows that are much more automated, maybe fully integrated. I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but more integrated at least with our dictation system, more integrated with our electronic health records, where data is flowing more rapidly with less user interaction, doing so in an automated way and pulling out insight in automated ways. I didn't want to get stuck in a 10-year procurement for incremental gain when I think maybe in 3 to 5 years, we're in that next realm of versioning of PACS. And it's been a little slower than I think, but I still think that's our short-term future.
It really does feel like we're on the precipice of, PACS 3.0 or whatever it is. The standards are there.
Yeah.
Vendors are doing it. It's just a matter of maturity, I guess.
Yeah. And I don't know if all the models are there to tie in with it. And that's more been a bottleneck too, some of the workflow improvements. But it's coming and it's ready. I know some new vendors are emerging now. I think we're on the precipice of it.
One of the things I found interesting was the approach that you took where the vendors were asked to load real anonymized departmental data sets. And so I have two parts to this question. One is how many calories did the informatics team have to burn to compile and anonymize and get that ready for the team? How much volume were we talking? And then what did this actually reveal about the systems and how the vendor could handle these types of data sets with the workflows that they were claiming to support?
This was the thing we were most excited about, and it was our biggest failure. I would say is simultaneously both. We anonymized about 1 terabyte of data. And we asked each vendor that was our finalist in our final group to sign a business associate agreement so we could send them some data. Even though it was anonymized, we wanted to make sure that we had that protection. And then we anonymized data sets that we knew were problematic. These were patients with hundreds of comparisons, functional MRI, more multiple functional MRIs. So data sets with tens of thousands of images and single studies, data that was broken in some ways, non-conformant DICOM, to see how the systems would handle it. And even though it was a data set that was it was over-selected for things like that, this is the real-world data that we get. It's not all perfect data coming off the machine. And so we wanted to see how that would handle it. So we are used to anonymizing data for research purposes and have automated pathways to do that. So that part identifying the data was probably the bigger challenge that we wanted to make sure was there, but based on some of those challenges, a lot of it was already in our test system. And so we were able to anonymize that relatively easily and in an automated way, and then send each vendor hard drives full of it or put it somewhere. Challenge was vendors didn't know how to handle it because vendors are used to and I understand why, but they're used to their data sets. And so they know which study is going to pull out their beautiful CTA and show their post-processing capabilities. And they know the other one that's going to show a multimodal data set that maybe includes pathology or a clinical image. And when we give them a terabyte of data, they have no clue what's what. Even if we give them a label, it's not something they're using every day. That was a major problem. So we had one vendor who basically ignored the request to show us our data on it. I don't remember everything, but they essentially did not show us our data on it. We had one vendor who loaded it, but only showed it if asked. And then the third vendor only had our data on the system, but didn't know our data, and so struggled through the demo. That happened to be our incumbent. So it didn't hurt them in the end, but it made them, it made them fumble around is probably the nicest way to say it. They were fumbling through the data because they didn't know it. And I understand that as a challenge. So that's why it was a cool idea. It didn't work the way we had hoped it would.
I'm curious. So you have a terabyte of data that you provide. Did it also have like a corresponding like spreadsheet that would indicate here are the studies and the different types and categories of edge cases?
Yeah. And then we asked to be able to see those cases up. So we knew which patient had 100 comparison studies or 500 comparison studies. We knew which ones were, functional MRI. And so we could ask for that. But they didn't know it in the level of detail. It wasn't part of their muscle memory.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes you make this assumption that the incumbent is going to have an advantage because, they're already playing with this data. They should know it. I've seen this before where an incumbent, there was a requirement to connect to a system that they should have had access to.
Yeah.
And sometimes the challenges that are presented in front of them, and you would expect them to have no particular challenge, and they do, which is always fun.
It was very interesting. It didn't turn out the way we had hoped it would, but I thought it was an interesting experiment. Probably the better solution is to be able to get a test system that you can install locally and actually try it on your data so you're the one driving it and your own data that you send to it. And maybe in future systems, that's what we would try to do instead.
I have been involved in procurements where we've done just that. We try to identify edge cases, and some of these are so niche, like blank accession numbers. They should never be blank. Yes, they should never be blank, but it happens.
Yeah.
Yes. And how are you going to deal with it? And to see the vendors react to some of these, it's interesting and it tells you a lot. I'm curious, during that demo phase, I imagine that, you had a scoring outline that you were working on when the demonstration was happening. But yeah, I guess there really was a fumble here where no one seemed to really do an amazing job. No one got an A+ on this.
No one got an A+ on that one. I appreciated more actually the people that loaded only our data and failed than the people that loaded none of our data and didn't even try.
Well, in a couple of weeks, we're going to go to RSNA. And, there's a lot of demonstrations with perfect data sets that have been curated and tested a million times, but that doesn't tell you real life. And so I liked your approach there.
I think from the RSNA demos, that's just sort of where we got the idea. We were going around and everyone's showing their adult CT angiogram because it is beautiful. And you get these aortas that are, because they're big vessels, they're all curvy and it segments perfectly. But that's not a pediatric data set either. And so we would never have any of the things that they're showing. And often the quality is not quite as good. And so some of it is just seeing how does it handle real world pediatric data, not just the edge cases, but the stuff that we see every day that has maybe a little bit of motion, not perfect contrast enhancement because the timing is off. Those type of things or even just a child with less abdominal fat, making it harder to segment out something. And, so we wanted to see that rather than the beautiful adult cases that every vendor is able to show us.
The paper is somewhat of a blueprint for kind of a very well-structured procurement. You did mention you're going to reevaluate in 3 years. In that time, you may or may not go to RFP again. But if you were to, it sounds as if you would implement a very similar process. Are there aspects that you would attack differently based on lessons learned?
Yes, there are. We would start, though, with a smaller group. I don't think we would cast as wide a net the next time, knowing what we know about the market today. If there are new entrants into the market, I think we would want to explore them. And if there's other groups we missed, but I've not seen a lot of change in the marketplace from my position. And so I would probably start with the 3 or 4 others that were in our near final group and keep it more focused on those to see if we were, which one has advanced furthest and could meet the needs of what we would want to do at that time. There's always things that change in the marketplace. AI has in some ways not advanced as much as we had hoped since that process. In some ways has advanced differently. And the market has shifted with other vendors coming in or leaving. And so interactions with those vendors of other systems that connect to the PACS would influence some of our decision making as well.
In the paper, you outline a ranking of the concepts related to the workflow that you would kind of weigh the highest. I'm curious, those are somewhat easy to quantify as far as they directly relate to the experience of the user. How did the aspect of service and the support that the vendor is able to provide, how did that factor in when you were scoring and evaluating?
I don't remember where it fell on the list. It's something we definitely talked about. We have a really high performing informatics team. And so we're usually we're a group that needs second or third level support if we need support at all. There's a lot of things that we do on our own. And so so that was important to us to be able to do those things on our own from a support side. But then when we can't fix our problem, to be able to escalate pretty rapidly, because we've done a lot of troubleshooting already, and knowing the system. And so we wanted both sides of that support. We wanted the flexibility to do our own thing and the ability to get rapid escalation when it was needed. And so some of that is, do we have a customer success type representative who works with us frequently? We like to be involved in providing vendor feedback regularly and helping to set product roadmaps, or at least give our input on that. It's always the vendor's decision on what direction they take their product, but we like to at least be able to have input and provide feedback. And so those parts were important to us as well as we were thinking about what's overall important. But I think that really workflow efficiency, user experience, those were by far higher ranked and the things we were looking for overall. While support was important, it was lower on the important list.
It's hard as well when your team is used to digging in and getting their hands dirty. And if you have a vendor that is going to prohibit you from accessing their database or getting, too close to their solution itself.
In the different procurements I've done, we've definitely seen that. We've had to the point where one vendor, this was like 20 years ago now, but one vendor would not just prevent access to the machines, but would construct the PACS workstations for you. And they would be done at their factory, and they're just all shipped to you to work. And we want to be able to do not just, I don't want a machine that's locked down. I want to be able to install everything on it, and provide access to it and configure it the way we want. But then also in the back end of the PACS, we want to get to the database, pull information out, use that to drive performance metrics and business intelligence platforms. And so we want really deep access into the database. At the same time, we don't want to break it. And so either having active APIs into the database or access to the database itself to pull our data is important.
It's one of these things that I find when you're balancing the approach of the well-established vendors versus the up-and-coming, where you have perhaps vendors that have more modern, maybe it's the Ferrari of systems as far as what it's capable of doing. They just don't have enough mechanics, so to speak. So, I'm curious if you came across any vendors where it looked really good, you just had concerns around their ability to scale to actually provide the support and the type of service that you're expecting?
Different vendors definitely had a different feel. Some vendors really wanted the relationship with us, and other vendors didn't care about that as much. That's probably the best way to say it, and to be the most neutral. There are definitely some vendors where we got the impression we would be an asset to them, a jewel to them, and giving them feedback, helping them to grow their system. And other vendors really didn't care about that. Whether it was, those systems may have been the Ferrari more so already. And so maybe that's because they already had those jewels and they didn't need to think of us that way. Whereas other vendors definitely came across as needing that or wanting.
I've had great experiences working with very small companies, and they build it according to your needs. And then, they end up getting bought by, a multinational company. And all of a sudden you're just small potatoes.
Yes. We've had that experience a number of times as well. And it's tough. And depending on what vendor buys them, they may or may not have an ability to innovate anymore. Being a big customer with a small vendor often has benefits. There are risks with it as well.
I'm going to give you a chance now, just to if you have any closeout thoughts, and then we can wrap this up.
Sure. Like I said earlier, I think the key thing is this is about the most detailed way you'd go. As you said, it's sort of an end-to-end description of a PACS selection. I do think it's something that's scalable up or down to any type of procurement, and you need to right size your procurement process for the scale of the solution, the impact of the solution on the department, and use that to drive what you need. So small thing like maybe selecting an algorithm for AI, maybe you only need one or two people to come to a decision. Something like a PACS selection impacts every phase of the department, every role in the department, and should have widespread involvement and really thoughtful decision making. And so, because it's a lot harder if you make a mistake, it's a lot harder to fix that mistake. And so we tried to take that type of detailed approach here. And I said, I think it's something that's scalable and people can take the things that they want and morph that process in the same way. And so that's what we tried to share to give that experience and to others. Maybe that thing to point out, since we haven't touched on it, we do include in the supplemental material for this article our full RFP as a blank one. So it's something if you have a question of how RFP should be written or what it should include. Our RFP had about 1,000 questions in it, and maybe there needs to be more, maybe less. That does need to be modified to your workflows, your scenarios, but that gives a sense of what we did and what we were asking for.
Great starting point.
I think
for someone
hopefully it's a good resource for people as well.
I'll make sure to include the paper link in the notes. And again, thank you very much for joining me today. Maybe I'll see you in a couple of weeks at the big zoo in Chicago.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think we'll definitely see each other there.
.com, HL7, IHE, and Snap. We're building the future, never looking back.